It's preparing.
All right, so we're here for, I think this is our fourth. Yeah, this is our fourth installment of How Do We Get Here? We're doing this on the 80s, right, which is a real pivotal time for us as a people. You got to go back and just remember everything we started from. The purpose of this is to educate and to inform and empower, right? And so if you don't know where you come from, you don't know where you're going. So everything that happened to us as people in the 80s, it was the result of years and years of systemic planning, procedures and programming that were in place that affected us. And so I want to go back to, we got to jump back to the 60s. We got to go back to the end of the 60s, beginning of the 70s. I remember at this time, COINTELPRO was already in place, and that's the system that they used to basically destroy any organization that they thought would be able to raise awareness or bring empowerment to a collective group of people that were being, oppressed. So COINTELPRO was being used against the Black Panthers, against all the other organizations that were similar to the Black Panthers. After they killed the majority of the leaders and killed in prison, a lot of the Black Panthers at the time, they started going for the groups that were affiliated with the Black Panthers and turning a lot of their leaders into political prisoners, assassinating them also. Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Medgar Evers, like those are all names of people who were destroyed by COINTELPRO. If you remember, we talked about that. But I want to start this off with talking about the war on drugs, which officially started in 1969 when Nixon, he called for an anti-drug policy. So that was 69. So they worked on the policy for a couple of years. In 1971, Nixon declared the war on drugs and declared drugs to be public enemy number one. So this is still during the Vietnam War. And at that time, there was a huge heroin or opioid epidemic that was sweeping across the nation, specifically in the ghettos, though in the cities, the urban areas. There were a lot of soldiers were coming back that were addicts, and there was a lot of hopelessness and despair. And hopelessness and despair is a breeding ground for addiction because people trying to escape reality. They want a temporary fix to get away from reality. That's not just then. That's always been like that through time. When people are oppressed people or slaves. Not just even here, like even back in Egypt time when the Hebrews were enslaved, that people would find ways, methods to escape, their reality. That's a human instinct. That's part of survival instinct. But in 1971, Nixon declared the war on drugs, and he declared drugs to be the public enemy number one. Drugs being public enemy number one, they replaced the Panthers being public enemy number one. But in July 73, the DEA was created, and they had an active war on drugs at that point with the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. And then in 1979, the fight got so serious. That's when a lot of that's when the Medellin cartel and Escobar, they were in power at that time. In 1979, I don't know if you ever saw that movie Blow, but in Blow, they depicted a guy who had bought an island, and he built a house on the island, a landing strip, and that was actually this guy named Jose something. He was like one of the top ranking guys in the Medellin cartel, but he really did buy an island, a part of an island in Bahamas, or should I say, he bought some land there, and he built a landing strip. And at that time, 80% of the drugs, the cocaine that came to America, it came from that landing strip. I'm sorry, 60% came from off of that landing strip, to America. So it was an act of war on drugs already in '79, and they stayed on that island until '83. So we talking about the war on drugs. I gotta put that in play, because that's I'm gonna show you how that affects us, like even to this day, that war on drugs. It was the school curriculum. It changed the whole schooling system up until the '60s. College was free. A lot of community colleges, they were free. It was free education, at that time, nationwide. Some people stopped earlier than others, but there was always a free educational system. Everything that like Bernie Sanders talked about, we did that before. We had a free educational system. People went to college for free, and so that was the rise of the rebellions in the '60s. That was the rise of the people they call hippies and the freedom fighters. And what it was that a lot of people were educated at that time. So it was all the oppression coming, but education was still free. A higher level education was free. So a lot of people took advantage of that. There were a lot of educated people. Like I spoke on before, the creators of the Panthers, Huey P. Newton, he was a highly educated man in law. Fred Hampton, he was very educated at a young age. He had already, at the age of 19, he already went away to college and came back. He was educated also. And there were just a lot of people that were really, really educated at that time. And so things had to change. So part of what the government did was different mandates on the schools and on the curriculums. So they privatized, a lot of the colleges became privatized colleges, which so they no longer were free. And a lot of the curriculums from grade school up began to get explicitly controlled by the government. So like even to this day, educators teach federally approved civics and social studies. So those curriculums are federally approved, the civics and social studies. So when you have a system set up like that, they're teaching the want of the people at that particular time. You know what I'm saying? Or the people in power. It might not necessarily be the truth, but it's the truth that they want you to know. Because remember, in order to have somebody in power, they have to have somebody who they're more powerful than. So if everybody had the same level of understanding of what's going on, then there would be no big eyes and little U's. Everybody would know what's going on. Ignorance is a weapon, and so they promote ignorance through the educational system. If that makes any sense. They teach ignorance in a way, and so like that's sort of the thing that's going on right now with people really, really being resentful to the critical race theory. You could kind of rename critical race theory as just history, because that's what it is. It's just really it's a true, more accurate history that's not taught, because it's a saying, the winners, they write history. The winners create history, you know what I mean? And that's just what it is. Those people, the people that's in power, the systems that are in power, they create the history that they want the people who they are in power of to know. And so in the '70s, the school systems changed. So they dumbed down society in the '70s a lot. Also, just a side note, in the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, it forbids federal predominance in education. And so they had to kind of amend the Constitution a few times to be able to change the educational system the way they did. But like I said about this and a lot of things before, just Google it and you'll see. Or matter of fact, if you want to go, you can go to a library, check it out. You could, if you don't trust Google, go old school, go to the library and look it up, and you'll see it. Get it straight out of a book that's credible, that you could trust. So we had this war on drugs that's going on. already. With the war on drugs, you have a drug pandemic, a drug epidemic going on in the urban environments of America. Most of the cities, the inner cities were still really, really suffering from poverty. They were turning into ghettos. The economy was really, really poor at the time, coming out of the 70s into the 80s. There was just so many problems, but all those problems combined really, really affected the inner city. Redlining was still, it was still a thing that was affecting the inner city because there still weren't people really moving into the inner cities. The suburbs were still very, very segregated and prejudiced out there. So even with the passing of the Fair Housing Act, it was still a lot of prejudice and stuff in the suburbs. They try to keep as many Black people and minorities out of the suburbs as possible. And so redlining was really visible, and in the areas that were redlined. Well, see on the map, I never explained this, but on the map, it was red, yellow, and blue areas. The red areas, the areas that were in the red inside the red lines were deemed hazardous areas. Hazardous for financial growth and investment, hazardous areas. So once they deem hazardous like that, it's kind of hard getting the financial institutions after the Fair Housing Act. They still have the red areas. So these areas were still it was the loans in those areas had really, really high interest rates. So the loans were expensive, or in some areas there just still wasn't financing for those areas, which made it hard for minorities and people with low incomes to buy homes, and it set the stage for a persistent racial wealth gap. So like even to this day, 66% of the areas that were redlined in the 30s are still deemed hazardous or minority neighborhoods. While it was 90, I think 3% of the areas that were within those blue lines, which meant like they were extremely good neighborhoods. Most of those areas are still predominantly white areas that, you know, I mean, you still might be looked upon or get a hard time, you know, if you're a person of color and you move there. But that's where the money goes. So we had the war on drugs, where the drugs are coming to the neighborhood and people are having problems with drugs, but it's a war on drugs. So that means that there are specific groups, task force of police officers that are combating these drugs issues. Keep in mind, these are areas with little to no hope, very, very low or very, very high unemployment rates. I mean, very high unemployment rates, little to no development in those neighborhoods. You know, they're run down, so it's kind of hopeless there. So it's just stuff on top of stuff. You know, this flows with the 13th Amendment. And so this is how we enter into the Reagan era. This is where we're coming from. You know, it's still a lot of nothing. And we entering into the Reagan era, right? And so in the Reagan years, the American economy and the government, it hit rock bottom. There's a lot of stuff going on with labor. I mean, even with the trucking industry, with the gas industry, like it was just bad. And so Ronald Reagan, he was the first president to run under the slogan, "Let's make America great again." Like, so that wasn't new, you know, that was already done. The thing is, that slogan has historically been tied to like racism and, you know, the Klan and, you know, things of that nature. That's like a slogan they use, you know what I mean? Let's make America great again, because America was great to them, you know, when slavery existed. So Ronald Reagan was the first president to use that term during his campaign. Before him, there was a state senator that said it in a speech, you know, but specifically Ronald Reagan, he used that in his term. In his speech when he won the presidency in 1980, he was saying that for those without job opportunities, we'll stimulate new opportunities, particularly in the inner cities where they live. So like he's addressing it, right? That was his way of reaching out to the inner cities by saying that for those without job opportunities, we'll stimulate new opportunities, particularly in the inner cities where they live. So that's kind of like crazy. I mean, he blatantly saying it like, you know what I mean? It's no job opportunities where most black and brown people are, because most black and brown people in the inner cities. And he said for those who abandon hope, we'll restore hope and we'll welcome them into a great national crusade to make America great again. So that was part of his 1980 election speech, right? So what Reagan did a lot of things. A lot of things that happened in the 80s. Reagan had 2 terms. He was there from 1980 to 1988. But one of the main things he did that helped add to the systemic oppression and help widen the economic gap was the trickle down economics, which I just call trickle down trickery. And what it was supposed to do 4 things. It was supposed to lessen the growth of government spending. It was supposed to cut both income taxes and capital gains taxes. It was supposed to cut regulations on businesses, and also it was supposed to cut the expansion of the money supply. So what it did do though was it increased government spending 2.5% a year while he was in office, which tripled the federal debt from 997 billion in 1981 to 2.85 trillion by 1989. He cut the tax rate. He did cut the tax rates. He cut it from 70% for people earning over 108K. He cut it to 28% for anyone with the income of $18,500 or more yearly. And he also cut the corporate tax from 46% to 40%. He deregulated cable TV, long distance phone service, interstate bus services, ocean shipping, and he eased bank regulations that created the savings and loan crisis of 1989, which cost taxpayers $132 billion, and it cost the savings and loan industry only $28 billion. It's kind of backwards, but so these are some of the things, you know what I'm saying, that he did that trickle down economics did. It just caused problems. It caused a lot of problems. There's a lot. So he got in office and he eased the restrictions and the taxes on everybody in general, kind of, but the people who receive the biggest tax breaks were the corporations. The corporations, and that at the time the 5% was 1% now, but it was 5% then of people who held, you know, majority of the wealth. And so by doing that, because no individual person that you or I know probably pays like capital gains taxes, right? So by easing those taxes on the corporations, those are billions and billions, hundreds of billions, maybe even trillions of dollars, right? What ended up happening is by the end of his term, the average person was paying like double the amount in federal taxes. It's similar. So Bush did it also when he came in for his economic stimulus. That also was trickle down economics, and what Trump did before he left, that also was trickle down economics. So it's supposed to boost the economy right then, but normally what it does is it lessens the burden on the corporations, and they don't always put that money. They rarely put that money back into the economy. It normally goes into the pockets of the administration, the CEOs, you know what I mean, the boards, the big bonuses that they were getting, the big bonuses that were recorded over the last like 3 or 4 years, some of the biggest bonuses they ever seen in corporate America in history. And it was because of the tax breaks, right? But what does it do to us? It raises the taxes on our checks, because if they put money back here, they got to take it from somewhere. So they're going to take it from down here. So they're taking more money out of our checks. That's just how it goes. And that's that system. That's that trickle down economics. And it destroys neighborhoods. When you have a corporate store like Walmart that can move to a neighborhood and be there tax-free on a state level, or on a county level even, and then they're tax-free, but then you have all these small business owners. You know what I mean? That money, that revenue is still needed for programming to run things that different levels of government funding runs, operates. So they have to get that money from somewhere. So then you'll see an increase on certain taxes, whether it be gas taxes or liquor taxes. Remember a couple of years ago in Chicago, they even had sweet taxes. They had the sweet tax where they were taxing the soft drinks and the beverages that had a certain amount of sugar in them. You got to get that money from somewhere, but that's all part of trickle down. So when he deregulated everything, he also eased some of the bank regulations. And anytime that you take your foot off the neck of the bankers, they get to just doing crazy stuff. They gonna make money however they can, right? Because that's their job, to make money out of money. And so with the savings and loan crisis of '89, it was crazy. I don't know if you remember at that time. I was like 9 at that time, but I remember seeing on TV, on the news all the time, bankers that were like killing themselves and stuff like that, because a lot of them were getting caught up in scandals. A lot of them were going bankrupt, or their companies were going bankrupt, and it was just crazy at the time, right? And so that's what the trickle down economics did. It just kind of made everything like a little crazy. It made the ghettos a little more ghettoish. It was nothing there. It took away things that were there by putting the country into more of a financial crisis, more of a financial burden. Jobs weren't that easy to come by. And then it was still a lot of prejudice on a lot of jobs. A lot of the unions, especially a lot of the union jobs were still really, really prejudiced. And so, so they kind of kept or try to, really push Black people out, to keep them out, Black people and people color, other minorities. And so this is coming out of the 70s. This is coming out of the 70s, just following the 60s. So we still into a lot of stuff. So at this time, Iran-Contra scandal, right? So while the country is in a really, really bad spot, and it's already a drug epidemic, here comes this Iran-Contra scandal. For those who don't know about the Iran-Contra scandal, it was the sale of arms to Iran to fund the Contras, which were a guerrilla army basically in Nicaragua. So they were overthrowing the government of Nicaragua, which had a socialist. They had a socialist platform. It's a lot with that. You know what I mean? It's a lot of understanding with that to even understand the whole situation. But basically, Ronald Reagan, he stated that socialists, at this time, they were still calling socialists communists. They associated socialism with communism. So Ronald Reagan made a statement that said any friend of communism is an enemy to the United States. But being a socialist doesn't necessarily mean you believe in communism. Those are two different things. And so what was going on was that Nicaragua was a socialist country, and they were kind of staying away from, like, it was certain things that they stayed away from. And so by staying away from these certain things, they kind of made themselves an enemy to the people that were involved in those certain things. You know what I mean? Like certain banking systems and things like that. And so what they did in Nicaragua and a lot of other South American countries was they would help the party that's in opposition to the party that's in power. And they would fund them with wars and weapons, and things of that nature to help them overthrow their government. So the United States is known for funding coups when a group of people overthrow the government, a militant group of people overthrow the government. So it's no different in Nicaragua. They helped fund the Contras who were overthrowing the Nicaraguan government, to put their system of authority in place. So they were selling guns to Iran, but that wasn't enough. All right. So what they started doing was also letting the Nicaraguans through the CIA sell cocaine in the United States. And so what came from that was, and this is all documented now. So once again, you can look this up. It's all documented. So what came from that is a huge influx of cocaine coming into the United States, which was already getting a lot of cocaine, right? But now you got the CIA also selling cocaine to help fund this war in Nicaragua, because it can't be on paper. You know what I mean? You can't have that on paper. That can't be on the taxpayer dollars. Not this war, right? So it's kind of like an under the table deal. And so in the 80s, a lot of cocaine started coming in through the CIA. It's coming into California. That birthed people like Rick Ross, the real Rick Ross. And he wasn't the only one. You know what I mean? The CIA was the plug for a minute. You know what I mean? Rogue CIA officers, you know, they were the plug for a minute, and a lot of cocaine came in through there. They started on the West, and they moved it through the West and Florida, and they moved it, and it spread across the whole country. But what also spread across the whole country was crack cocaine. So they found ways to change cocaine and to change the form of cocaine, to change the structure of the chemical components of it, the structure of it, and turn it from cocaine into hard cocaine. And it's called crack. And they moved that across the whole country. And crack was like way more addictive and just way more dangerous than just regular cocaine. Or even when people used to freebase cocaine, it was just way more dangerous like than that. And so this caused a different kind of drug epidemic, because crack was one of the strongest, most addictive drugs that had ever been introduced, you know, and it was just a huge, like, it was just terrible. It was an epidemic. Started in the 80s, around 83, 84. And it just continued. You know what I mean? We still see the effects of crack today, because it was crackheads everywhere, but crack really, really hit the inner city. You know what I mean? But like I said before, the place where it's no hope, and it's a lot of systemic oppression. It's no resources, and it's just poverty. You know what I mean? That breeds hopelessness, and then people look for a way to escape hopelessness. And man, there you got it. You got the perfect match right there. So you put this into all the inner cities, and you just watch what's going to happen. You know, the only success, well, the main success that people saw who in those ghetto, those urban areas, were the gangsters, were the drug dealers, the hustlers. You know what I mean? The pimps. Before the drugs, the pimps, the hustlers, just everything that was, you know what I mean, not good for society. You know what I mean? Everything that wasn't really a positive way, it was still the way of acceptance, of turning, making something out of nothing, but not necessarily good. You know what I mean? For the people, you're not really helping your environment, or your people, you're not really empowering your people. You kind of helping break them down. But this is what we had as a people. So that's what majority of people seen. Those are the successes that majority of people seen, those kind of successes. And so if that's all you see, if that's what you mainly see as success, you know what I mean? And that's what you know as being successful. Me, myself, you know, like when I was young and I was growing up, the only people who I seen who had money were the people who were doing, who the hustlers, you know, those the only people that I saw had money. And that was, like I say, this is all a thing. The CIA, the government, they played their part in that too. In Contra, and Contra led to the crack era. So at this point, it's still people though who are fighting the fight. And I'm gonna talk about Jesse Jackson for a minute, right? Jesse Jackson was he was basically a student of Martin Luther King. After he watched Bloody Sunday on TV in 1965, when Bloody Sunday was when blacks got their voting rights. and and a lot of people had marched to the polls, especially down south. A lot of people marched to the polls, and they were met with very, very violent, aggressive resistance. It was televised. A lot of those pictures that you see of the dogs attacking the people, a lot of those people were just in line to vote. That was Bloody Sunday. Well, so after Jesse Jackson saw Bloody Sunday on TV, he went down to Alabama and he asked Martin Luther King for a job. He met with him, asked him for a job. He started working for him in '65, and he worked as an organizer for the SCLC until 1971 when he started Operation Push. So he was there when King got assassinated, when King got shot, and he was there, assassinated. He was there for that, and he was there for a lot. And he worked with the SCLC until 1971. He started Operation Push. Jesse Jackson also has done a lot of things. He had controversial visits to the Middle East. When people were being held hostage in planes, when they were holding Americans hostage in planes, which they did quite a few times because of America's involvement in Nicaragua with the Contra scandal. They started sending Jesse over there. He actually freed a few hostages over there. He had negotiations talks. He got a couple people free that were being held hostage over there. So he saved some lives. He put his work in. In 1988, he led the Democrats with the Democratic delegates with the popular vote when he ran for presidency. He also attempted to in 1984, but in 1988 he was leading in the popular vote. He didn't win though, of course, but Jesse had a statement which he used to always say all the time. It resonates with me. I remember from schools: up with hope and down with dope. And the crazy thing is that it's a real simple statement, right? It's kind of catchy because it rhymes, but see, it was so hopeless. You know what I mean? I'm saying this as somebody who grew up in the 80s though. It was hopeless. Like, you didn't really see anything around you. I once said before that, like, my teachers, they never asked me like what I wanted to be when I grew up in school. You know what I mean? That wasn't the kind of conversation of the setting that we had in school. As a matter of fact, when I got to 7th grade, my school was so crazy because the area around my school was there's a few different kind of gangs. So they used to have to chain my door shut, and my principal used to patrol the school with a bat or a crowbar. Like, it was crazy, And so, but that was the situation. That was in the 90s when I was in junior high, but in the 80s, this is all leading up to the 80s. And with the crack epidemic and with the hopelessness, you know what I'm saying? So that's what you got in the 80s. You got a lot of organized crime that really, really started making, even more money with the crack epidemic. And so in Joliet, what happened in the 80s was specifically here, there were a lot of jobs in the 50s and the 60s that made Joliet kind of like a booming environment. There was a lot of money here. There's a lot of money here. There's a lot of housing here. And by the 80s, a lot of those jobs had permanently shut down. A lot of those factories, a lot of those manufacturing jobs, they permanently had shut down. And a lot of poverty set in, on the area, especially on the east side. There's a lot of poverty. It was impoverished, because there's a lack of money coming in through the households. And like I say, poverty, it kind of sets a sense of hopelessness, right? So now you got this drug trade that's gonna start moving in the middle of the 80s, and you got a town that's impoverished. The town is dying because there's no growth. If anything is not growing, it's dying. So at that time, the town was dying, and what ended up happening was, what they blame it on. They try to say a lot of people moved out here because they had people that was locked up in like Stateville or Little Joliet, and they try to say that caused a gang influx out here in like '82, um, and then they try to say gang recruitment roles and all that and that. So from '82, they say street gangs. This is from the state's attorney's website. They say from 1982 onward, through the '90s, um, street gangs recruitment roles and they numbers roles in Joliet. But see, the thing is, it was just like that was the perfect environment, not just in Joliet, but everywhere. You know what I mean? For if the only thing that you see or the only thing that the only kind of success that you see, you're gonna go after that. So if what was going on was that us as a people were still being excluded from other kind of successes, other kind of ventures. If the abnormal thing was to see a black man succeed, and the normal thing, was to see a black man barely making it or struggling, in the neighborhoods they in. And in those neighborhoods, it's normal to see a guy with a nice car, a guy with a fat bankroll in his pocket, because that's when people didn't really, everything wasn't electronic transfer or something. People actually carried money back then. And so you seeing a guy with a nice bankroll in his pocket, and a nice car, nice clothes all the time. That's kind of how you measure success. If that's the only person you could look at and say, man, that man is successful. You know what I'm saying? That's who you want to be like as a child. That's who you're gonna see, and you're gonna want to emulate that, right? And so that wasn't just happening in Joliet. That was happening everywhere, from coast to coast. And so that's what was going on. I mean, it was our communities were getting destroyed by previous systemic settings that were already in place, and then with the new drug epidemic that followed right behind the drug epidemic of the 60s and 70s with the heroin. And heroin never left, but it kind of got replaced by crack. Crack was a hard hit for us. And it was just terrible. And then you still didn't have money coming into the community. So also what Jesse Jackson did was he formed the excuse me. He formed Operation Push, but he also formed some other organizations. And what some of those organizations that he formed, they really pushed for affirmative action. And so what affirmative action did, Trump got rid of affirmative action. But what affirmative action did was make sure that it was a specific quota of minorities that worked on job sites. Regardless, it just had to be a certain quota of minorities that worked on job sites. So it was a lot of people that were against this, even black people, because they were like, well, if you want something, you got to work hard for it, and it's not that people weren't working hard for it. It's just that we were being excluded. If we weren't being excluded, if we weren't being prejudiced against or segregated, then there would be no need for affirmative action. If we had the same equal kind of school systems, and things of that nature, there would be no need for affirmative action. Everybody would be on a level playing field. But since the playing field wasn't level, then things like affirmative action were necessary. Also during this time, diversity, training, and inclusion, which was starting in the 60s, but it really went into effect, in the 80s. With the passing of affirmative action laws, you start seeing a lot of diversity, training, and inclusion, things of that nature, right? And it made a difference. You start seeing more of everything. More black teachers. You start seeing more black doctors. You start seeing, a lot. You start seeing more blacks on union job sites. You start just seeing more black people in the corporate offices. You start seeing more black, just period, right? So that was a start. And all this was, the 80s, which wasn't that long ago. And so they were talking about the deregulations that Reagan had did. And he had also deregulated cable TV. So that's real instrumental too, because what people don't understand is that uh, a lot of people don't understand that what you see visually, what you allow into your mind, it definitely has an effect on you, right? So what your kids see and what's allowed into their mind, it has an effect on them. So image is kind of like everything. That's even a saying. When they deregulated cable TV, the the way the imagery was projected in Hollywood, like a lot of that changed. So during the 70s, you had a lot of black exploitation movies, right? And so what those black exploitation movies did was they kind of like made pimping and hustling like look real good on camera. You know what I'm saying? They made it look good on camera. Um, but those movies came out at the end of a really, really like prideful time. So people weren't really cool. A lot of people weren't cool with those movies. You know what I mean? A lot of people were like, man, a lot of people who were woke, who had some kind of sense, they knew like, man, that's not cool. That's not a cool depiction of us. I mean, it might be funny, it might be nice to watch, but we shouldn't glamorize that, right? Because that could lead to a problem. So what happened in the 80s was with the deregulation of cable TV, imagery started being pushed, you know what I mean? And they started showing what kind of what I was saying about, what I'm saying, being in neighborhoods where that's hopeless. And the only person you seeing succeed is the dope dealer. Well, they started really, really pushing the dope dealer on TV, MTV, you know what I mean, through the music videos and through other things on cable TV, like just imagery, like really, 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 really things in our neighborhood that we look at as like, what I'm saying, bad. Like, man, we might see it and we be like, man, that ain't cool, right? They really start pushing that on TV, like real hard. And what that does is it does two things. People who know nothing about it, they look at it like, okay, that's all black people right there. That's what black people do. That's all black people. You know what I mean? And for us, the people that know about it, it glamorizes, you know what I mean, things that you might not be so cool with in your household. And so kids watch TV and kids see their dad get up and he go to work and they see their dad, he struggle to pay his bills, but they watch TVs and they see the image of this actor who acting out the role of some gangster or something, and they like, man, he said that's what it is. So it changed from being, right in front to like literally right in front, right on the TV screen, and that caused a lot of damage. And so by being able to promote imagery, you can kind of control the like scenario. So later on, in the 90s, the imagery that was promoted in the 80s, and once it started sticking, you know what I mean, and it spread into the households, and the imagery of the bad black guy got spread into the households in the suburbs, and then the suburban kids, you know what I mean, they started wanting that bad black guy, you know what I mean, they started listening to NWA, they want the gangster in their life, you know what I mean. It kind of took away from the positive imagery that was out there. So like Bill Cosby wasn't cool anymore, and he was a successful black man on TV. He had a house and he was a doctor and he married a lawyer, you know what I'm saying? But Bill Cosby wasn't cool anymore because the negative imagery was what was cool. That was what was happening. So that's what people saw wanting to be like, you know what I mean? Because we've always had this fight to just be something. This was always the fight, you know what I mean? For us as a people, after slavery, we always had a fight to own our own businesses, own our own towns. Then those towns and businesses get burned down, right? By racists who don't want to see us succeed and want to keep us underneath their thumb. And then it went from just owning our own towns and own businesses to, you know what I mean? We just want equality. We fighting these wars. We want equality. And then, you know what I mean? We win partial battles where they say, yeah, oh, okay, it's okay. Now it's okay for you to be, you can have some kind of rank in the army. You can fight for this country and be kind of proud of yourself. You know what I mean? But it's still not a level that we're gonna not allow you to reach. And that doesn't have to be spoken. That just is what it is. And so that fight to just be, you know what I'm saying, somebody was always there for us. And with everything that happened, you know what I'm saying, from the 70s to the 80s, you know, that took that fight out of the household to just be somebody. And it took that fight and it made it so that the average child, when I was growing up, the average dude that I knew, you know what I mean, we all want to be the dope man. We all want to be, you know what I'm saying, dude and them who up there, who got the cars with the loud horns in the back. You know what I mean? Like that's what it was. It kind of changed. The 70s and the 80s like really, really changed our society. I mean, it was a lot of other things going on. There's a lot more breakdown of the family. You know what I'm saying? The war on drugs really, really started impacting things because it started taking, I mean, there's situations where, like, even though it might be people who don't necessarily couldn't find an opportunity, they would still find ways to provide, you know, for their family, and they were still looked at, you know, as, you know, the leader of that household, or, you know what I'm saying, somebody who you can go to and ask for advice in the community. And it just, I don't know, it just did so much. The 70s and the 80s, they just did so much. And the war on drugs, it took so many people off the streets. It took a lot of those guys who people did listen to. It took a lot of the guys who did say, look, man, you got to make sure you go to school every day. You know what I mean? It started that war, you know? So it really, really influenced, it really influenced us in more than one way. And so that's why the 80s were pivotal. They were pivotal for us. And so during the 80s, though, we still had glimmers of hope. You know, I spoke on Jesse Jackson. We also had Mayor Harold Washington, and he was definitely a glimmer of hope. I believe he was the mayor from 83 to 87 or something, right? 83 to 87, I think. And he died. He had won a second term. He died in office. Literally in his office, had a heart attack. You know, and it's a lot of scandal. They were trying to say that they killed him. And Mayor Daley, what he did was he unseated Mayor Daley Sr. You know, he unseated Mayor Daley, who had been in office for God knows how many years. I can't even remember. But when he did that, he was always an opponent of Mayor Daley. Prior to him being in office, he did a lot of things for the Black community. Harold Washington, if you ever got time, look him up. He did a whole lot of things for the Black community. He was the abnormal, you know what I mean? The thing that's not normal. He was a Black man that was in politics, that was real successful in politics, that he got heckled, he got booed, he had spews of racism hurled against him all the time. But you know what I mean, he held fast, he stayed strong, and he gave us hope. You know what I mean? So we had people. We just didn't it's just the majority of us weren't there. You know what I'm saying? We had some people there. We had some people doing things. We had, you know what I'm saying, like I say, affirmative action pass. So we had some people, you know, in corporate America. We had some people in the office environment. We had some people, you know what I mean, doing things. But majority, the norm was in the hood, you know, and especially if it's a Black community that's in an urban environment that's still recovering from the economic strain of the 60s and the 70s, and it's still being affected by the trickle-down economics of Reagan, and is now being affected by this crack epidemic. The average thing you've seen was hopelessness, misunderstanding. You know what I mean? You saw a lot of drugs, you saw a lot of gangs, and the influence was growing. And that influence that was growing was had a tool to help it grow by the deregulation of cable and stuff. So now it's more things being shown on TV. And that stuff that was being shown on TV, it was accepted as cool by different demographics, you know. And so that helped spread that. You know what I mean? That helped spread it a lot. So I'm gonna stop here today with the 80s. If there are any questions, anything, you know, we can take them now. And then the next time we come back, we're gonna go into the 90s and the 2000s and talk about the demasculation of the black male, which has been going on since the beginning of the time. But with the influence of TV, like I said, TV took the place, cable TV, it took the place of the like a lot of key elements of the family structure. And so instead of people sitting down and having dinner, which is probably really, really rare now, like it's not a lot of people that sit down and have dinner together. You know what I mean? Most people sit down in front of their phone still. They're on their phone all day. They're on the social media sites all day. You know? And what that does is that kind of like, man, that divides the family. The family structure is not the same as it was prior to social media, prior to, you know what I mean, the internet as the internet is now. Like prior to these levels, these methods of communication, like family structure was different. And when the family structure changed, you know what I mean, like everything changes. You know what I mean? So we'll discuss that next time. And I appreciate you having me on again, Ms. Pat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Right.
Really refreshing and enlightening. And so just want to make sure I let you know that. So we appreciate you. And we do look forward to your next session. And just reiterate for me what the timeframes that we'll be going over for the next session.
The next sessions will be the 90s and 2000s.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. And Carl, take care. And Black Lives Matter. How did we get here? Session 4. So stay tuned, stay on point, be here for session 5. Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
You're welcome.